Everybody knows Dennis the Menace, or at least, I thought everybody knew the same Dennis the Menace, because when I was younger, I remember seeing this film. And I was so confused. Why is Dennis blonde? Why is he American? Who on earth is Mr. Wilson? And more importantly, where the hell is Nasha? Because if you grew up in the UK, this isn't Dennis the Menace. Our Dennis was this.
One leg arriving airmail!
And that's when I discovered one of the strangest coincidences in cartoon history, because somehow there are two completely different characters, both called Dennis the Menace, one from Britain, one from America, created by two writers living on opposite sides of the Atlantic. And somehow they both made their debut on exactly the same day, March 12th, 1951, same name, same day, yet neither of them copied the other. Honestly, if this happened today, everyone would immediately accuse somebody of copying. But the more I looked into this story, the more impossible it became. Because not only were they both called Dennis the Menace, they're not even remotely similar. Created by cartoonist Hank Ketchum, American Dennis is basically just a well-meaning kid who accidentally drives everybody around him up the wall. He doesn't wake up planning to ruin anyone's day, he just asks the wrong questions, does the wrong things, and somehow poor Mr. Wilson always ends up paying the price. He's more of a nuisance than a menace. Then you look at Britain's version. Created by David Law for the Beano, British Dennis feels like he wakes up every morning wondering whose day he's about to ruin. This kid starts fights, vandalizes property, carries a catapult, owns an attack dog called Nasha, and one comic literally has him sawing the kitchen table in half because he was bored. One of them is a mischievous kid, the other looks like he'd nick your bike, convince you it was your fault, and then ask if you've got another one. Which naturally raises the question, how on earth did this happen? Because in 1951, there was no way for ideas to spread around the world instantly like they do now. Comic strips took weeks to write, draw, print, and distribute. The Beano issue was dated March 17th, but it actually reached the shops several days earlier and would have been sent to print weeks beforehand. Meanwhile, American Dennis made his newspaper debut on March 12th. By the time either creator could realistically have known the other existed, both comics had already been written, printed, and distributed. Neither creator even knew the other Dennis existed until after publication, which is exactly why historians still describe this as one of the strangest publishing coincidences ever. And if you still think one of them must have copied the other, this is where things become almost impossible to explain, because the two names didn't even come from the same place. British Dennis actually got his name from an old music hall song called Dennis the Menace from Venice.
Does Dennis the Menace from Venice, a gay gondolier with gold rings in his ear, he will sing you a song as he pushes along his gondola. Dennis the Menace from Venice.
George Mooney, the editor of the Beano, heard the song on the radio and suggested the name while David Law was creating the character. And weirdly enough, that song ended up coming full circle decades later, because in 1986, the American Dennis even had an episode called Dennis in Venice, completely unrelated to the British character, yet unknowingly referencing the exact place that inspired Britain's Dennis in the first place. At this point, it almost feels like the coincidence refused to end. Meanwhile, over in America, Hank Ketchum's inspiration couldn't have been more different. It came from his 4-year-old son Dennis after he refused to take a nap and completely destroyed his bedroom instead. That one afternoon ended up inspiring one of the most famous comic characters ever created. Two completely different stories, two completely different inspirations, yet somehow, they still arrived at exactly the same name. And honestly, just stop and think about how absurd that actually is for a second. This wasn't a case of one artist quietly copying another, and it wasn't one publisher borrowing an idea they had already seen. Everything we know points to two completely independent cartoonists working thousands of miles apart for entirely different publishers, creating completely different characters with completely different inspirations, at a time when there was no internet, no instant communication, and no realistic way for either of them to know what the other was working on. By every bit of common sense, this is the kind of coincidence that simply shouldn't happen. And somehow, every single stage of the process still managed to line up. Two separate ideas were created independently, developed independently, approved independently, printed independently, and distributed independently before either creator even knew another Dennis the Menace existed. After all of that, against every expectation, both characters were introduced to the world with the exact same name at almost exactly the same moment. The more I researched this story, the less it felt like an ordinary coincidence, and the more it felt like the kind of event that should be statistically impossible, because every new piece of evidence doesn't make the mystery easier to explain, it makes it even harder. If somebody pitched this as the plot of a film, you'd probably laugh and say the coincidence was too ridiculous to be believable. And yet somehow, this wasn't fiction. It actually happened. And if you're enjoying the video so far, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like. It genuinely helps these videos reach more people, and if we can hit 10,000 likes, I'll make another video just like this. Anyway, they eventually found out about each other. You'd expect lawyers to get involved, a massive copyright battle, and years of arguing over who actually owned the name. Instead, they basically made a gentleman's agreement. American Dennis stayed in America, British Dennis stayed in Britain. For a while, that solved the problem, until both characters became incredibly successful, because suddenly, having two Dennis the Menaces became really awkward. When the American film came out in 1993, it couldn't even be called Dennis the Menace over here. In the UK, it was simply called Dennis. Meanwhile, when the British cartoon was released internationally, it often had to be called Dennis and Nasher. Even after everything that's happened, the coincidences still somehow haven't stopped. Over the years, both versions have even started acknowledging each other. In one issue of the Beano, someone mistakes British Dennis for the American version and wonders why he doesn't have blonde hair or wear dungarees. Then, in another comic, members of the Bash Street Kids travel to America and meet the American Dennis himself. He introduces himself as Dennis the Menace, leaving everyone completely confused because to them, he doesn't look anything like Dennis the Menace. And then there are the little coincidences that almost feel too strange to be real. The American Dennis's dad, Henry Mitchell, even looks uncannily similar to British Dennis's dad, Walter. Whether that was intentional or just another coincidence, nobody really knows. But after everything else in this story, it's hard not to notice it. The mix-ups didn't stop there either. In the Italian dub of Dennis and Nasher, Dennis's parents were accidentally named Henry and Alice, which just happened to be the names of the American Dennis's parents. To this day, people are still accidentally mixing the two worlds together. All because of one bizarre coincidence that happened more than 70 years ago. And honestly, that's my favorite part of this whole story. More than 70 years later, they're both still around. Neither one replaced the other. Neither one disappeared. Instead, they've spent over 70 years sharing one name because of a coincidence nobody could have planned. It's the kind of story that sounds completely made up, except every single part of it is true. I genuinely still can't get my head around it, and that's exactly why I think it's one of the greatest publishing coincidences in history. So now I've got to ask you, which Dennis did you grow up with? And more importantly, which one do you think is the real Menace? Please don't click off. If this channel's ever meant something to you, I'm asking from the bottom of my heart, please subscribe. I'm really trying to get to 100,000, and every single one of you makes a difference. I believe in this community, and I believe in you. Thank you, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.